Theodore Roosevelt once said, "It is not the critic who counts. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marked by dust and sweat and blood." That speech, it's called The Man in the Arena, and it's been quoted a million times. But here's the part nobody focuses on. The guy in the arena, his face is marked, he's bleeding, covered in dust, failing publicly. And Roosevelt's point was, that's the guy who matters, not the one watching safely from the stands. Because here's the truth. Winners fail more than most people even try. Not the sanitized LinkedIn version of failure. Real, embarrassing, everyone saw me eat it failures. Why? Because they have something most people avoid at all costs. Stick around. By the end of this video, I'll show you the 3 signs you're avoiding the one battle that actually matters. But first, we need to talk about what courage really is. Because I promise you, it's not what you expect. When you think about courage, you picture something like starting a business, giving a big speech, standing up to the bully. You know, slaying dragons in the real world. The stuff that looks good in movies. And sure, that takes guts. But here's what I avoided for years. The hardest battle you'll ever fight isn't out there. It's in here. It's that conversation you keep avoiding with yourself about the gap between who you could be and who you actually are. Let me show you what I mean. For almost a year, I kept telling myself I was going to get back to reading before bed. Tonight, I'd say. Tonight, I'll shut down screens by 10, read for 30 minutes, and actually sleep like a human being. And every single night, I'd stay glued to my desk past midnight, trying to make up for all the distractions I'd given into during the day. Then I'd crawl into bed and immediately open Instagram or X. On repeat, day after day. And the wild part, I genuinely believed I was the kind of person who would read. That my good intentions would somehow guard me from temptation. They did not. Because I kept finding these incredibly reasonable sounding excuses. I have to stay informed, right? What if something important happens? Yeah, because my scrolling at 1 a.m. was definitely going to be the decisive factor in global geopolitics. Like my scrolling is somehow going to prevent World War III. That's the level of absurd rationalization we're talking about here. But then, one afternoon, I caught myself mid-excuse, and I realized it's not a discipline issue. I'm failing because I lack the courage to admit I've been lying to myself the whole time. And that's the thing. You're not stuck because you don't know what to do. You're stuck because you don't have the courage to face the part of yourself that doesn't want to do it. The part that would rather scroll, snooze, and stay comfortable. That's the real dragon. Not your boss, not your circumstances, or the economy. It's the comfort-seeking version of you that's running the show. And it's not just the small stuff. The scrolling, the snoozing, it's the big stuff too. Like that hard conversation with the co-founder you've been putting off for 6 months. Your gut is screaming that you're heading in the wrong direction, but you keep playing along because you don't want to hurt their feelings. Really? That's your excuse? How about you stop letting yourself down first? That's probably the best thing you can do anyway. And you know it. The question is, are you brave enough to be honest with yourself? Even when what you see is kind of embarrassing. Because here's the truth about why winners fail more. They have the courage to actually try. And when they fail, and they will repeatedly, they have the courage to look at it, learn from it, and try again. Without posting a 47-part Instagram story about their journey. But it all starts with internal courage. The kind nobody sees and doesn't get likes. That courage to listen when that quiet voice whispers, "Hey, this isn't working." Most people drown that voice out with podcasts, scrolling, urgent emails that aren't really urgent. Basically anything that lets them avoid 20 minutes alone with their own thoughts. As if it's the most terrifying thing there is. Then there's the courage to speak your truth, even when it makes you sound stupid. To say, I have no clue what I'm doing, but I'm going to figure it out. Instead of pretending you've got it all handled while quietly drowning, hiding behind a neat composure and professionally looking dashboards. And then there's the courage to try again after you've already crashed. When your self-trust is shattered and every fiber in you is screaming, "See, I told you this wouldn't work. Can we please go back to Netflix now?" Winners push through that moment. Not because they're fearless or superhuman, but because they've realized something most people never do. Getting it right the first time is not how it's supposed to be or the only way forward. Instead, you just have to act and move without any guarantees. Then get feedback and course correct. Move, feedback, adjust. That's the loop. And courage is what keeps you in the arena when everything in you wants to quit. Now you might be thinking, okay, but how do I know if I'm avoiding this internal work or if I'm just, busy? Great question. Here are 3 signs, and I'm warning you, at least one of these is going to sting a little. So first off, you tell yourself you don't have time to think, but somehow you've got 2 hours a day for content you won't remember tomorrow. Look, if you can't carve out 20 minutes to be alone with your thoughts, you're not busy, you're avoiding. I get it. Being alone with your thoughts can be weird or uncomfortable, especially when it's the raw truth and not some cover-up story you made up to feel good about yourself. It can be nasty and mean sometimes, for sure. But that discomfort, that's the signal. If that one stung, good. Keep paying attention. Sign number 2, you're collecting advice but not implementing anything. You've got all the books, many unread, let's be real. The courses, the saved posts, the watch later playlist that's now way longer than your favorite Netflix series. But your life looks almost exactly the same as it did 6 months ago. Please understand, that's not a learning problem, that's a courage problem disguised as research. And finally, when you already know deep down what you need to do, but you keep finding reasons why now isn't the right time. I'll start when I have more money, when things settle down and I feel ready. I waited for that feeling of readiness for like a decade before I finally quit my job to start a robotics company. Turns out readiness is just a myth we tell ourselves so we can keep postponing the uncomfortable stuff. Here's the truth. You'll never feel ready because readiness isn't a feeling, it's a decision. And that decision comes before the confidence, not after. You act despite feeling not ready, and that's a decision. And here's what nobody tells you about avoiding this. This isn't just about productivity or hitting goals. So listen up. This is about waking up at 45 and realizing you've been just a passenger in your own life the whole time. That's the real cost. Because there's a gap right now between who you could be and who you are. And that gap, it doesn't close by accident. Scrolling motivational quotes at 2 a.m. isn't going to shrink it either. Trust me, I've tried. It only closes the moment you have the courage to actually look at it. James Clear said it perfectly. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And you are a system. Every system needs feedback to improve. So if you're avoiding honest feedback from yourself, if you're not willing to look at where you're drifting, you're not improving and you won't be. You're just repeating the same patterns, wondering why this year feels exactly like last year. And this will continue until you finally wake up to that harsh truth and stop resisting it. Winners fail their way across that gap. They stumble, fall, get back up, course correct, and keep moving. Not because they're superhuman, but because they decided that living on autopilot is actually scarier than failing in public. So here's my question for you. Do you have the courage? Not the courage to start a business or post something impressive. Maybe that comes later. But right now, today, do you have the courage to sit with your own thoughts and ask, where am I going through the motions? What truths have I been avoiding? And what would I do if I wasn't afraid of looking stupid? Because the gap between where you are and where you want to be, it won't close itself. Readiness is a decision. So the only question left is, are you willing to make it? Alright, if this hit home, subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and drop a comment. What excuse are you finally ready to let go? You don't have to have it all figured out. None of us do. But putting it into words, that's the first step. And if you want more on building actual systems that make change stick instead of just thinking about building them, we've got a video on that right here. Thanks for watching. And now go have that conversation with yourself. You've been putting it off for too long.